So, for the past few years, there has been much debate and contention over the phrase, Happy Holidays, replacing Merry Christmas. In fact, it was just brought up in our Sunday school class, which was funny. I had to defend myself before I got into this rant this morning, that I wasn't targeting that person. But yeah, so one side says, we want to be more inclusive, that there's more than just Christmas this time of year, and we don't want to offend people who have different religious backgrounds and are celebrating different holidays. And another side says, well, Jesus is the reason for the season, so we should be able to say Merry Christmas to whoever we want. And another side says that, we should remove all traces of Christmas, so take it all off our Starbucks coffee mugs, which was a really hot thing like 2-3 years ago, and remove it from movies and any references to it. And the other side says, well, we should get to Facebook and let everybody know that, take the cause of baby Jesus to everybody, whatever it is. Well, as I said, thanks. As I said, I'm going to be a little bit sassy this morning. Is that okay? Just a little bit, because that's not the focus of this series. But I think the whole thing is a little bit ridiculous, personally. If you want to say Happy Holidays, Merry Christmas, either one is good for me. Like, as long as we're being nice to each other for 1 month out of the year, then it's good, all right? Like I told the Sunday school class, I really don't like season's greetings. I just feel like that's cold and really means nothing. But yeah, it's just, I don't really care. But if you do, that's fine. If you want to take to Facebook, that's fine. But all that being said, we're not getting into that today. But I just want to say that up front because we are starting a series called Happy Holidays. And your reaction may be, how dare you, Pastor? This is a Christian church. Well, to be clear, this is a Christmas series. We're not just celebrating any holiday. So for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be in this series leading up to the second biggest holiday in the Christian church. But notice something with the graphic. Do you see it? Finger quotes. Quote, unquote, happy in the phrase Happy Holidays. Okay? Here's what we know to be true about the holidays. They're not always what we expect them to be. While others may be displaying some Christmas spirit with everything that they do, we may just not be feeling it. And for one reason or another, life can leave us feeling a little bit empty around the holidays. While we wouldn't characterize ourselves as a Grinch or a Scrooge, we can sometimes fail to share the same Christmas spirit that everybody else is sharing. And that's not the way Christmas is supposed to be, right? That's not the way that the holidays are supposed to be. This should be a happy season. We should be happy. And unmet expectations at Christmas time isn't a new occurrence. Some of my favorite pictures on the internet are the Christmas time Pinterest fail pictures. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Pinterest is a website where people post crafty things like recipes or different hobbies or whatever, and other people can get on and see those things and then copy them or do them for themselves. And then the people that try some recipe, let's say, and they're trying to replicate a specific image for their cupcake, when they try it and they fail, they take a picture of that and put it next to the image that was good, and they call that a Pinterest fail. They tried and they failed. It looks totally horrible. Well, I'm going to share some of my favorite Christmas time Pinterest fail pictures. And as I was looking, I found that there's actually two main themes. There's either the baby photo shoot fails at Christmas time or the cupcake fail, as you will see. There's a few of them here. Here's the first one. Left is how it's supposed to look, and that's how it turned out. By the way, I hope that none of these are yours. I mean no offense. I'm just stepping on everybody's toes this morning. There's the idea, and then the baby doesn't hold her head up, so nailed it there. That looks great, huh? Looks like something for Halloween, not Christmas, I think. That's usually the case. There's everybody's favorite snowman. Wow. Close. So close. Expectations versus reality. I like to end on that one. As you can see, when it comes to the holidays, things don't go always as you expect them to. And this is true for a Pinterest attempt, but we know this to be true in life as well. And the Christmas season is supposed to be about hope, love, joy, and peace. Those are the things that we talk about every week. Each week has a theme to a specific word. We light a candle for that. We read scripture according to that. Yet there are years where people feel hopeless, unloved, depressed, and stressed. 4 words that you're not going to get in any Christmas card of any sort. But there are things that happen in the 364 days leading up to Christmas that affect how happy our holidays are going to be. Just as an example, someone who recently went through a divorce is going to have a hard time feeling loved as they wake up to an empty house that probably isn't even decorated on Christmas. Someone who has moved across the country is going to have a difficult time feeling loved as they spend their first Christmas without their family and without much connection to anyone else in their town. Someone who struggles with seasonal depression is going to have a hard time feeling joy as they see nothing but cloudy skies and snow and late sunrises and early sunsets. Someone who has lost a loved one earlier in the year is going to find it difficult to feel joy as each holiday tradition will only be a reminder of what's missing. Someone who's working at a department store is going to have a hard time feeling peace as they work extra hours and take care of more people, more grumpy people, than any other time of the year. And now have to worry about stuff happening at department stores. Someone who has a mom, dad, or child battling a serious disease in the hospital is going to have a hard time feeling peace at Christmas time as it approaches, and they can't help but worry, is today going to be the day and forever change Christmas going forward? The truth is, all of these feelings, hope, love, joy, and peace, they all affect one another. And perhaps the feeling that gets most affected by all the others is that of hope. Why is that? Because hope is about anticipation. Hope is about what's coming. So if you think about it, divorce, change, depression, grief, stress, worry, all of those things are going to cause someone to dread the coming of the holidays. In essence, someone who experiences these things may lose hope that the holidays are going to be happy at all. There may be some people who are experiencing less than perfect holidays, but at least they have hope that Christmas morning will brighten their spirits a little bit. But people who are experiencing some deep hurts and difficulties have a much harder time finding that hope. They fear that that day is only going to make their feelings worse. In a word, they're hopeless. Then there are the people who lose a job right before the holidays, and they're going to have a hard time feeling hope as they consider how the bills are going to get paid, let alone how there are going to be any gifts under the tree. Or what about the people who just don't make enough money to give their children what they really, really want? They're going to have a difficult time finding hope in a Christmas miracle that they're going to come into some money before the big day. And I know that Christmas is not about the big gifts and everything, but who doesn't want to give a good gift to their children? And when you can't do that, you can feel pretty hopeless. This idea of hopelessness, it's not something you automatically associate with the Christmas season, but it's something that people experience at this time of year. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you wouldn't admit it, but you're feeling pretty gloomy amidst all the glitz and lights and glamour of the holidays this year. Maybe you'd say, yeah, I wish for happy holidays, but I don't think that's going to happen this year. Hope, love, joy, peace, they're nice sentiments, but they're not true for me this year. Some great expectations for the holiday, but not my reality, I'm sorry to say. And if that's you this year, if you can resonate with anything that I'm talking about this morning, if you're going through one of the examples that I've spoken of, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry that this time of year is not all that it should be for you. I'm sorry that the holidays seem to be anything but happy no matter how hard you try. But a good place to begin is to understand that you're not alone in what you're going through. And so let me first say that you're not alone in your struggles. In fact, you may be surrounded by people who share the same thing as you, who are going through the same thing as you. But then as we turn to Scripture this morning, you will find that there are people who are associated with the original Christmas story, as happy and as awesome as that was, who can relate to you as well. people who had unmet expectations, people who were not happy, people who had lost all hope that the first Christmas would ever come. So today we're talking about the Israelites. And leading up to that first Christmas day, things were not going well for God's chosen people. And if you were with us last week, we wrapped up a series called Gods and Kings, where we explored Israel's first kings that in many ways had failed, and then there's a history that continued to fail with each successive king after that. And according to the author of the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, 8 out of 4 kings were really good, but 32 out of 40 were really awful. And they led Israel down a path they couldn't return from. Well, our passage this morning highlights a line of kings that belong to the southern kingdom of Judah, which is the kingdom where David's descendants reigned after Israel split into 2 different kingdoms. And this is Matthew's account of the gospel, his version of the Christmas story. And for his account, before there's any angels, before there's a manger, before there's an immaculate conception, Matthew gives us this list of David's descendants. And his list actually connects all the way back to people that were before kings and before Israel had any kingdom. In fact, it begins with the name of Abraham. So this list goes way, 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 way back. And to try at least to keep your eyes from glazing over this morning, we're going to start at verse 6, not read the whole genealogy here. This is chapter 1 of Matthew's gospel now. And this is where the line of kings begins, so you'll recognize some of these names. And as we read this, I'm going to say a few things about each king. In fact, I'm just going to let you know whether it was a good king or a bad king based on what the book of 1st and 2nd Kings said they were, based on how they followed God and were they obedient to God and that sort of thing. So first, Matthew chapter 1, verse 6 says this. David, a good king, was the father of Solomon, a bad king, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, bad king. Rehoboam, the father of Abijah, bad king. Abijah, the father of Asa, good king. Asa, the father of Jehoshaphat, a good king. By the way, great kid's name, Leslie, for our coming child, Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat, the father of Jehoram, a bad king. Jehoram, the father of Uzziah, a bad king. Uzziah, the father of Jotham, a good king. Jotham, the father of Ahaz, a bad king. Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah, a good king. Hezekiah, the father of Manasseh, a bad king. Manasseh, the father of Amon, a bad king. Amon, the father of Josiah, a good king. And Josiah, the father of Jeconiah, a bad king, and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. Now, despite having a few good kings in the bunch, Judah's kingdom could not stop their downward spiral. And that got me thinking, that doesn't seem fair, right? I mean, the good guys did their best to lead well. Why was there still this downward trajectory that led to the exile to Babylon anyway? You would think that the good would outweigh the bad, right? But that's not how it works. Eating an entire apple pie on Thanksgiving is not going to be balanced out by eating an entire salad bar the next day. Or by running 10 miles, I'm sorry to say. I went there. Yes, I'm guilty. The damage that's done on Thanksgiving Thursday is not easily overcome on Black Friday or the rest of the weekend. As is usually the case, the bad outweighs the good. That's why it's so difficult to lose weight, but way too easy to put it all back on. Having lost the same 40 pounds 3 times, I know that that's true. It's way too easy to put all the weight back on. Hopefully I can stop doing that. But the good did not outweigh the bad that the bad kings had done for God's kings or for God's people either. The bad that was done by the kings only led the people further and further away from God. And there was no recovering from that. So this is why God sent prophets to his people. And contrary to popular belief, prophets were not fortune tellers. It's not like they had a crystal ball to see what the future said and then they went to the kings to enlighten them. God had spoken to the prophets to let them know this is where the people are headed unless they turn their course, unless the kings lead them in a different direction, unless the people turn around and come back to me, this is what's coming. So really, a good prophet didn't tell the future. A good prophet changed the hearts of the people so that future never came, so that the day of destruction would never come. that God's mercy would show up if the people could turn their hearts around. And the warning that king after king and generation after generation of God's people heard was this: you're going to lose the land God gave to you. And the temple that you created to worship God is going to be destroyed. You're going to be conquered by your enemies. And many of you will die in the process. And those of you who do survive will be kept in captivity by your enemies. So, not a very hopeful future, right? This event that was to come for Israel would one day be known as the Babylonian exile. The event that we just read about, briefly alluded to, in Matthew 6, verse 11. This event is hopeless. Without a major change in leadership or in the hearts of Israel's people, they could not avoid this event. But there was still a message of hope in the prophet's warning. Almost all the prophets that we read of in our Bible today spoke of a future day when the exile was over and things would be made right. And collectively, it went something like this. This is what the prophet said. One day, Israel would return back to the land of Jerusalem, and the temple would be rebuilt. God would come to live among his people. He would bring with him a future messianic king from David's line, and he would rebuild the family of God's people, which surprisingly would include people from all different nations. All of the devastation caused by Israel's sin and God's judgment would in that day be reversed. Because of God's promise to David, he would send, after the destruction of Jerusalem, a new king, Emmanuel, that we just sung about, which means God with us. And Emmanuel's kingdom would set God's people free from violent, oppressive empires. This king would be empowered by God's Spirit to rule over a new Jerusalem and bring justice to the poor, and all nations would look to this messianic king for guidance, and they would come to live under his peaceful rule. His kingdom would be God's kingdom, and it would be established over all nations. This new messianic king would bring God's blessing and be a priest to all of God's kingdom. All the nations would come to recognize God, Israel's God, as the one true God. His kingdom would transform all creation, bringing peace. In other words, through the lips of the prophets, God gives the kings and Israel, all the people of Israel, this warning of what's to come because of their own waywardness. But in the same breath, God promises to raise up a new David afterwards, a future messianic king who is going to be the kind of leader that Israel needed but never got. Now, we know that the hearts of the people and the kings did not turn back to the Lord, and the day of the destruction did come to them, as the prophets had said. So after that day, there must have been a perspective change on the part of the people. While they faced their worst nightmare with the destruction of their city and the destruction of their temple, and they were headed to captivity in Babylon, they could now believe the hope that came with the prophet's warning. If they didn't believe it before, now that they're seeing it before their eyes, they had hope that it would one day end. They faced their opposition reluctantly, but they had revived hope, believing that God would one day make everything right as he had promised. If what the prophets had said about the exile came true, then God would return them to the land, restore the temple, rebuild the city, and most importantly, raise up the most powerful of kings from the line of David and reestablish Israel as the most powerful nation in the world. So they had high hopes for everything to happen as God had promised, even in the midst of their devastation. And 70 years passed by in Babylon before their hopes began to be realized, or so they had thought. Coming back to the genealogy that's written in Matthew's gospel, he continues. He says this: after the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel. And it's under Zerubbabel that the first of Israel's exiles are able to return to Jerusalem. Babylon is conquered by the Persian Empire, and the new Persian king sees the exiles and is willing to send some of them back to rebuild the city. And so I imagine that the Israels thought, this is it. God is beginning to fulfill his promise to us. Our day of disaster only lasted 70 years. We're going back to the city to rebuild it and rebuild the temple. We just need that promised messianic king to rise up amongst us. And because of the timing of it all, the people, along with some of the prophets of the day who have written some of the books in our Bible, Haggai and Zechariah, They believed that Zerubbabel was the messianic king that they had been waiting for. He was from the line of David, as we've been reading. He was the one to lead the people out of captivity and back to Jerusalem. Everything was falling into place for him to be the Messiah that was rising up. But we know that Zerubbabel was not the Messiah. So check out the rest of the genealogy that leads up to the promised Messiah. I'm not going to read all the Zerubbabel, father of Ehud. I'm going to just give you the names, okay, just to get through this. So Zerubbabel, then Abihud, Eliakim, Azor, Zadok, Akim, Eliehud, Eleazar, Mathan, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. The reason why I read that is that's 12 generations from the beginning of the end of captivity in Babylon to the promised Messiah. 12 generations, people. That's like great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers, okay? Put that in greater perspective for you. The Babylonian exile was officially over just before 500 BC. That's 500 years before Christ, who would be the Messiah. So for 500 years, the Israelites could do nothing but hope in this promised Messiah. And generation after generation passed away, and the promised Messiah had not come, and God's promise was not yet realized. Wave after wave of new opposition came against the Israelites, and they wondered, where's this powerful king who's going to come and rescue us? When would the Messiah come to save us from our oppressors? So as we have seen in the genealogy of the Messiah, the people had a long way to wait. So they waited, and they looked for a sign. And they paid close attention to the line of David with each successive king to see if he would be the one. 500 years, and there was nothing. Hope, even though it was still there, it was like just a small flickering candle of a light of hope. But in the ninth month BC, God spoke and began to set things in motion. Through an angel named Gabriel, God spoke to a young woman from a no-name town in Judah called Nazareth. And he told her that she would be the one to give birth to the child that the prophets spoke about. That she would give birth to Emmanuel, God with us, Israel's promised Messiah. 500 years of waiting, 500 years of hoping, 12 generations of David's descendants, and their hope was finally being realized. And only this girl named Mary knew about it. Israel's Messiah was coming. The Savior of the world was coming. Emmanuel, God with us, was coming. He was coming to change the world. He was coming to change the hearts of his people. And he was coming to redeem all of Israel and the rest of the world along with it. God was fulfilling his promise. That's because God always comes through, even when we least expect him to. And so we begin to see the hope restored to the people of Israel, one Israelite at a time. As the story goes, when Mary found out that she was chosen by God to be the mother of the Messiah, she quickly ran to her cousin Elizabeth, perhaps trying to figure out this whole thing. And upon arrival with a simple, "Hey Elizabeth, how's it going?" Mary's cousin knew what her story was, and she was overjoyed. Mary's greeting caused Elizabeth's child in her own womb to jump for joy. And so, prompted by the Holy Spirit, Elizabeth knew that Mary had a special child in her womb. And so, without showing her a positive pregnancy test, or an ultrasound pic, or a big Facebook reveal, or even a little baby bump that wasn't probably even showing at this point, Elizabeth knew Mary's news. Not only that she was pregnant, but that she was carrying the Messiah. And so, in a loud voice, she exclaimed, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear. But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" Then Elizabeth's husband, Zechariah, gets in on the praise to the coming Messiah, though he doesn't speak about it until after his son is born, because there's a big backstory to all of that where he's not able to speak for his wife's entire pregnancy. But then when he does get a chance to speak after his son is born, this is what he does. In Luke 1:68, Zechariah begins by praising God. He says, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come to his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he said through the holy prophets of long ago." Skipping ahead in the Christmas story, 8 days after the Messiah was born, the parents took him to the temple to be consecrated to the Lord in accordance with the law. And in the temple courts, a righteous man, a devout man named Simeon, happened to be there too. And so he spotted the happy couple from a distance, and he swooped in, and he snatched the Messiah right out of Mary's arms. I don't think that anybody should do that to a mother. But when you know that it's the Messiah, and you're so excited, it's what you've been waiting for so long, you just can't help yourself. So Simeon took the boy in his arms, and to the relief of Mary and Joseph, he didn't just run off with the child. He praised God in front of them. Luke chapter 2, verse 29 says this, "Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel." As you have promised, your salvation for all nations to the glory of Israel. It's similar language to that of the prophets. And then right after Simeon said these words, another prophet made her way over to the child and his parents. And her name was Anna. And she was an older and really faithful prophet. And Luke says that she worshiped the Lord faithfully at the temple day in and day out. She was someone who was in tune with the will of God. Perhaps that's why, without anything written in Scripture to indicate how Anna knew that this child was the Messiah, she just knew it. And so Luke reads this way, "Coming up to them at that very moment, Anna gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Israel." Now, over the next few weeks, we're going to take a closer look at the events leading up to the birth of the Messiah. But I think it's important on this day, as we are talking about the hope that was waited for by the Israelites, to see the reaction of some of the people who first saw that hope be realized. So don't think that we've skipped over the entire story today. There's still more to be discovered from Mary and Joseph and the other players in the Christmas story. But for now, consider how big of a deal it was for these individuals to see a 500-year-old promise come to pass. Consider the rekindled hope that must have been burning in their hearts as God came through in this way. Having seen him move in this way must have given them a great hope for themselves and for the people of Israel. God was still with Israel. God was still amongst his people. In fact, he was so present with his people that he demonstrated that in becoming one of them. God always comes through even when we least expect him to. And I know that in the midst of a truly hopeless situation, those words may ring a little bit hollow to you. I don't want to make any promises that your situation will change in any way. I don't know your situation, only you and God knows it. But what I do know is that I'm not the promise maker. God is the promise maker. And what he has already promised should be a source of encouragement to you. He has promised you his presence. He has promised you his favor. He has promised to work all things out for your good. He has promised to fight your battles. He has promised you your salvation. He has promised you victory. He has promised to be your comfort. He has promised to be your guide. And this list could go on and on because God has promised you and me so much. And in the midst of a season where hopelessness may seem even more hopeless, you need to remind yourself of the promises of God. I imagine that folks like Mary, Elizabeth, Zechariah, Simeon, Anna, these folks were forever changed by this promise being fulfilled. And some of them had a really big role to play in the story, while others barely had any role to play at all. I think the person who mothered Jesus was a greater character than the person who held baby Jesus in the temple courts for a few moments. However, each person was changed in their own way because they saw the fulfillment of God's promise this time, and they could hope that God would fulfill his promises in the future. Now, in the same way, let the faithfulness of God in your past give you hope for the future. I mean, the Christmas story, as we see the big picture of it, it's one example, one really big example that should fuel our hope today. And then you have the story of Easter and the hope of Jesus and the hope of his return to come and make all things right and completely fulfill the prophets of old. So whatever you're going through now, let the same God of your past give you hope for tomorrow. But understand that God's timing is different than our own. And while the Israelites thought that God was going to work according to their timeline, God was operating by his own timeline. Things were coming together for the coming Messiah. They just couldn't see it. Trust that God is working on your behalf, even when you cannot see it. Be patient with God, even if it takes 500 years. He will come through. And if we're being honest, 5 days, 5 months, 5 years, that can feel like 500 years to us. But if God has promised it, God will fulfill it. Keep hope alive. Keep believing for God to move and let him work in his timing. And at the end of the day, our hope is not in our circumstances in and of themselves. Our hope is in God alone. For the Israelites that held out hope for 500 years of waiting, it's because they hoped in God, not in their circumstances. And you too can have hope that the one who sees you in your circumstances can turn those circumstances around or allow them to do something great in you, something for your greater good. The circumstances may not change, but you can hope that they do. But if they do not, that doesn't change who God is and the reason that you have hope in him. Our hope must be placed in God to believe that he will do what is best for us, and we must believe that there are better days in our future. Now, I'm not sure if you find yourself lacking hope this Christmas season at all or not. But if you do, I want to encourage you today. Without giving away too much too early in this series, I just want to say, hang in there. Keep coming over the next 4 weeks. The church is the one place that possesses the real meaning of Christmas. My prayer is that for each of you over the next few weeks, it will help you in whatever situation you find yourself in and maybe make the holidays a little happier than you ever thought possible. For today, understand that we must believe in what God says he will do. We must be willing to wait on God to do what he said he will do, because God always comes through even when we don't expect him to. If he will make good on a 500-year-old promise, he will make good on his promises to you in his timing as well.